Here it is. For the first time in my Wilds playthrough, I ran into a rather large damage number, 902. I was completely intrigued by it, but my attention was also divided because there were so many other aspects to this game that I was really diving into, and I knew I had to return to it because I kept seeing these numbers, 849. I knew it had something to do with multiple focus strikes and my squad, 936. And then this happened. This absolutely blew my mind. The amount of damage ticks that were produced on this attack, triple digit damage numbers, plus all the subsequent pops. I was hooked. I was obsessed. From here on out, I have to know how I'm causing this damage and how high can I get it.
Um, I'm working on it. Oh my god, that was 1933 on that blue wound pop, guys. Oh my god. Oh my god. Pike, to answer your question, yes.
First and foremost, I'd like to thank my friend and collaborator in this video, Pike over at Pike Analysis. I'm going to link his information in the description. He's also producing a video on the same subject. It's going to be a little bit more mathematically oriented than that's his specialty. He understands motion values, hit zone values, how to take that information with monster HP to determine the exact damage attack should be doing. And by me being able to provide him tons of raw footage and data, we were able to look at the exact damage ticks and find out exactly what was going on as far as scaling, and a mechanic with the longsword focus strike that we just did not know what that was going on. So the only question after that is this a glitch? Is this actually damage occurring? And if you check out from the last few clips, yes, every time this is working, monsters HP are melting. We're ending fights in earlier phases, ending monsters well before they can leave. This is real damage that's accumulating. So what is this? It's actually an accumulation of 3 different monster mechanics in this game. 2 of them are quite simple to describe. One of them is a bit more complex, but we'll talk about all of that in this video so everyone has a thorough understanding of what they're seeing, what's going on, and to recreate these damage numbers at home and have the time of your life doing this. The next couple of clips, with a little bit of previous communication on letting me take care of the wounds, this became a very viable strategy. No. Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Bang, son. 1103. Nice. That was just on 2 wounds, too.
Got it.
Like so many aspects of damage in Monster Hunter Wilds, or just Monster Hunter in general as a franchise, so many things are determined on how you stack certain damage-inducing items, skills, builds, and techniques. And that's what basically this is. So we're going to go step by step, and we're going to strip away all the perks of our armor. Right here I just have the maxed out bone sword and nothing in my armor, basic hope stuff, just to show the points of the foundations of these mechanics, and then we'll go from there. I am going to go ahead and turn on the wound mechanic where the wounds just stay on. And so let's first talk about every single aspect that determines the damage of these wound pops when you perform a focus strike. So first, I'm going to do a focus strike. You have some damage that's induced by your weapon, and then you see that pop of 30. Let me give you a minute to slow that down. And then we'll do another test right here. Single focus strike, physical damage, wound pop is 30. That's your wound damage explosion. The rest of the damage you see incurred by your focus strike is determined by skills in your weapon and aggravator and weakness exploit and critical hits and all that good stuff and raw. But that actual wound pop right there was just a flat 30. And now I want to show, I'm going to put on my metiest set possible, and just to show you that that will not affect the damage of the wounds whatsoever. This is my meta longsword set that I'm using right now, and it will affect the physical pops of the focus strike, the physical damage, but the actual wound pop will not be affected. See, it's still 30. Let's do a singular one over here. Oh, I popped all 3.
Alright, now we're in our meta set. We're going to do a focus strike. This physical damage is determined by the strength of your weapon, but that pop, the wound pop, is still 30. So nothing in my skills that I just added to my weapon right here, none of that affected the damage of that wound explosion. So what does affect the damage of that wound explosion? Alright, let's get into all of that, because the first thing is actually a skill, and it's Partbreaker 3. Alright, this is a set that I built with Partbreaker 3. As you can see here, the skill of Partbreaker at level 1 increases the parts damage and damage dealt when conditions are met by 10%. What are the conditions? Makes it easier to break large monster parts, increasing damage dealt when destroying a wound with focus strikes. That's the main thing. At level 1, it increases the damage by 10%, 2 20%, and 3 30%. So we make this build right here. And this is just a build I made that I wanted to include Partbreaker 3. I need my affinity. I want my affinity high for my wounds. I'll explain more about that later. And then I just wanted to stack as much raw as I could on there, so I put Counter Strike for the 25. I got a little bit of Agitator in there. Alternatively, I did also build a set, and we can talk about this more, that has... Partbreaker 3, Agitator 3, and I'll go into the benefits of both of these sets a little bit later. But the whole point is, now we have Partbreaker 3 in our set. When we go to destroy these wounds, let's just destroy this one. Boom, that wound pop is now 39. I know there's a bunch of numbers on the screen, and I'll slow this one down. Focus strike, wound pop is now 39. 30% more. Okay, doesn't look like too much of a difference right now, but let's get on to the other aspects that are going to increase wound damage, and the next one is the HP of the monster. Alright, we can easily show this aspect here in the training room. We're just going to change the strength settings to maximum 8-star. It's just going to simulate a higher HP monster. And so let's see what that does. I'm back in my bone test set without all the, meta stuff. So just the fact that we're now increasing the monster's HP, not Partbreaker, not anything else in the weapon. Check out the wound pop now. $123. Show it again. 123 for the first wound pop. So what that means is the first wound pops we were showing were 30, and then we added 30% for 39, and now because we drastically increased the HP of the monster, the wound pop significantly increased in damage too, because it's correlated to the HP, the total HP of the monster, and actually how much the HP the monster has left, but we'll get into that a little bit later as well. One other aspect of this is multiplayer. When you have multiplayer, the monster is scaled to the highest HP at 4 players. And the numbers go, in fact, Pipe figured this out. So on 2-player scaling, the wound pops are going to pop for 180% of what they would normally. So let's just figure this 123 is 100%. So at 2 players, that 123 is going to be 80% more. At 3 players, it's going to be 225% compared to that 123. And at 4 players, it's going to be 275% compared to that. I can't really show that here in the training room, but I will show that later in the video. So the number of players is also the same factor as in just a monster increasing in HP. For example, a regular Gormagala has less HP than a tempered Gormagala. So the highest HP monsters you can have in this game are tempered versions of, Gore, Arkveld at 4-player scaling. Zoshia is going to have high HP. So the higher the HP the monster has, the higher and higher these numbers are going to go. It directly influences that. Now let's take a look at what this does with Partbreaker. Alright, we're going to put our Partbreaker 3 set again. And now we have a monster that has 8-star HP. And let's see what happens when we pop this wound. It was 123 before. Should be 30% higher. 159. Exactly what we were expecting. Partbreaker 3. on top of whatever the HP induces the increase for the monster's wound pop damage is going to add 30% to that. Okay, so we have Partbreaker 3, the overall HP of the monster, tempered being the most, and then the 4-player scaling of playing with your squad. If this is an issue for you, a little later we'll talk about it. Come join our squad Zero Faints. We're just a bunch of friendly group of hunters from all over the planet that absolutely love this game and do stuff like this, figure this kind of stuff out. Okay, now probably the most important thing about this video and what actually increases wound damage the most, and that's going to be this aspect. I'm going to tone down the health back down to the minimum just so we can have smaller numbers so I can show this a bit easier and easier to understand. And we are going to go back to our bone sword just to show that this is a mechanic that works irregardless of whatever your weapon is, other than your Partbreaker 3 skill, of course. So the next thing we want to talk about increasing wound damage is hitting multiple focus strikes, the scaling of this. So I have a wound right here and a wound right here. I'm just going to hit these 2 for now. We'll go to 3 and above in a moment, but let's just do 2. Again, don't worry about the subsequent damage numbers you're seeing from the focus strike. That is going to be important in the last more complex mechanic that we're talking about, but for now let's just talk about this wound pop damage. Okay, so for hitting 2 wounds, notice what happens to the damage. The damage pops of the wounds. Oops, I only hit 1. It was at 30. Let's hit these 2. The first one pops for 30, the second one pops for 50. I'll slow that down and pause right here so we can show that. And so there we go. Now you might be looking at that and say, okay, 30 to 50, it's a 20 increase. That's about a 66.7 increase. I can understand why you would think that, because that's kind of the way we were trying to formulate the scaling of this as well, considering the first wound is whatever 100% damage of a wound pop would be, but it's actually quite wrong, and I'll explain it in just a second, but I want to show you what happens when we hit all 3 wounds, so you can see the 3 wound pop scaling for the first, second, and the third. The first one pops for 30, the second one pops for 50, and the third one pops for 80. Let me pause right here again to show that in slow motion so you can see that clearly. Excellent. So what is happening here? Why is this scaling from 30 to 50 to 80? Well, the first thing we have to understand is this first wound pop is not 100% of what a wound pop damage is. And I'll show that to you in just a moment, because the longsword scales this way. Pretty much every weapon but the bow scales the way that we're just about to talk about. And I'll show you why the second value of the second wound pop is actually what the 100% value is. So once again, we have 30, 50, and 80. So the first wound pop that you destroy is actually going to be destroyed at 60% of the value of what a wound pop destruction should be based on the HP of the monster. Why? I'm not so sure. It might be a mechanic to discourage just opening up one wound, especially in a group, and immediately destroying it. The second wound pop is what actually pops for what the actual 100% value of a wound pop, what it would be. So that's why it goes from 30 to 20, because 30 is 60% of 50. Now, this 80 number that we're getting over here is 60% on top of that 50. So the way the wound scale is, the first one breaks at 60% of what a wound pop damage should. That's the 30 number. The second one pops at 50. That's 100% of value of the damage of what a wound pop should scale at. And the third one pops at 80. That's 160% or 60% more than the 50. That's where you're getting that 80 number. And the same scaling applies when we go and put on our Partbreaker 3 and our meta and all our good stuff. And we're just gonna ramp up everything. Sorry. There's the build, Partbreaker 3, and let's ramp up the monster HP as well. Get it back up to 8 star. And I want to show you that this is going to have the same exact scaling. Alright. I just wanted to show you with 30, 50, 80, it's easy to see the 60%, 100%, and 160% scaling that way. Now, once we have Partbreaker 3 and the high monster values, look at these things. Ablow. 152, I didn't even see it. It happened so fast. I'll put it in slow motion so we can all talk about it right now. Talking about it, talking about it. Let's talk about it. Once again, let's do the 3 strikes. 159.9. There's 266.5, and what was that? 429.5. And that scaling is exactly the first wound is 60%, the second wound is 100% of the value of the wound strike, and the third one is 60% more than the second wound, which is the 100% value. I hope I'm making that clear, because this is exactly what's going to determine us getting massive damage later in this video, and I'm going to show you some clips on how that happens, because there's additional scaling past the third one. Okay, we'll get to the tempered wounds in just a second. I just forgot. I mentioned this about the bow. And this is also how we know that the second wound is scaled for 100%, because the bow scaling does not go 60% of the original 100% to 160. The bow just has a 100% whatever the value of the wound pop destruction should have been for all 3 values. So I don't have anything fancy. I just have my Zoshia weapon, and so all of these pops are actually going to pop for 50 instead of 30, 50, 80, because they all pop for the bow. Wow, I love that damage. Okay, let's slow that down. And there we saw that the actual wound portion of those explosions were all 50. So the bow as a mechanic always burst every single wound as whatever 100% value is of the wound pop damage, and that is how we know that during the 30, 50, 80 scaling for every other weapon, the 50 is actually the 100% value, and the first wound pop is popping at a 40% less value than it should. So what this tells me is if you have a bow user, for example, a bow should be the one that should handle one single wound pop. And as soon as we get to second wound pop, it's still good for the bow to handle that. Once you get to 3 wounds, it's always more damage for another weapon that can handle multiple wounds to handle all 3 of those wound destructions. And that's also kind of the point of this video. This isn't just information for a longsword. Everything that we've discussed so far, including the blue wound pop damage that we'll talk about, will apply to any weapon that can hit multiple wounds. So what we've discussed so far about the mechanics of these focus strikes and wound destruction damage is going to affect any weapon that can hit multiple focus strikes, especially if you can hit 3 or more. The gun lance is a good example of it. You get all 3 of these pops, you're going to get the same 30, 50, 80 scaling, or the 60%, 100%, 160% scaling. Great sword, another great example. That drag focus strike does the exact same thing. So if you're in a situation with 3 wounds, let's go ahead and let them form. There you go. Do your drag, get all 3, bam, bam, bam. What else? I don't know if there's other weapons. I'm just not familiar with playing too many others, but if your weapon has the ability to do the secondary input, you know, the first input of your focus strike is always some kind of poke mechanism, you know, and then you have the follow-up animation, whether you're using the right or left. So if you are able to, you know, and some weapons might sneakily be able to.
Alright, let's talk about the blue or tempered wounds. These are wounds that form on tempered monsters only, and they will form on the scars that are mentioned of these monsters. See those white scars? That's where these tempered wounds will form. This will be kind of important a little later. This is just a baseline to show that my singular focus strike is going to take out 1 wound for about 557. It's towards the beginning of his health. He's a tempered. We're 4-player. I have Partbreaker 3. I'm looking to max damage now. Here I managed to get 3 regular wounds to show the scaling of 3 wounds. You know, about the 500 that we're talking about. Then it goes quite significantly higher, 849 to 1358. Yeah, it's time to get excited, people. It's really time. So, what happens? One wound being destroyed, that's a blue wound instead of red. Instead of looking at about 500, you get a 30% damage increase. It's going to be 725 in this instance. The blue wound will always pop for 30% more than what a red wound will. And here comes the interesting part, it scales. So now I hit it second, and it scaled all the way up to 1103. Why? Because I got the, this is 60% normal damage. Now I get the 100% damage of hitting the second wound, and now I get the 30% additional damage of it being a blue wound. 1104 on 2 wounds. And you guessed it, this is 3. I'm going to get 2 red wounds, and then the third wound's going to be a blue wound, and that's the explosion for 1933 on the blue wound, because it is now doing 160% of the damage of a typical wound, plus the 30% from it being a blue wound, plus the 30% from my Partbreaker. This is insane. Well, once I was able to recreate this completely changed my playstyle about how I approach the game to have fun. And we're going to have that conversation here in a little bit, but there's so much more to discuss in this video alone. For example, what if we hit 3 wounds and we get 2 of them as tempered wounds? What if we hit more than 3 wounds? What if we get 5 wounds? And I have before. And what does this mean for everybody? Because these are all mechanics that are universal to the game, not just the longsword. So I hit these 2 blue wounds, right? The first red wound is the one that pops first. You can see on the right of the screen it says regular wound destroyed first, and then the 2 tempered, and it comes out to 557, 929 to 1144, the scaling of the 3 wound burst there. But you notice all the other wound pops or damage pops I'm getting? There's so much more to this story, but before we get to that, I need to discuss the scaling that we mentioned earlier. Let's go into the multiplayer scaling aspect of this. This is a bit more technical than in my wheelhouse, so you should refer over to Pike of Pike Analysis's video. He's going to be able to explain the math behind this much more thoroughly, but I can explain the concept so you fully understand it in battle. So let's take a look at a couple of clips here. This is going to be a singular focus strike with a tempered Utjuna with a 3-player scaling. It's 276.8. Okay, same scaling, 3 players, tempered Utjuna. This is 3 wound strikes, so we can see what that looks like. 276, 461, and a 738 scaling. This clip coming up is also 3 players on a tempered Utjuna, but this is with Partbreaker 3, so it gets scaled up to 351, 585, and 936. Okay, now we're going to go to a regular Utjuna with 4 players, and you'll notice that the first focus strike is actually significantly higher, 509, and then we get into the 800s and so forth. So this is just showing you that the amount of players is a significant factor into increasing the monster's HP, which is a significant factor in determining the damage of these wound pops. More so than whether it's tempered or not is how many players do you have. Here we see Zoshia. I'm going to hit it for 1 wound pop for 611, and this is early in the fight. You can see its white shell is still on. So he has higher HP at this moment. And now you're going to see a little bit later in the fight when his shell's gone, he has less HP. This is a double focus strike, but the first one only hits for 509 before the second one gets back up to 849. That reduction is caused by the monster having less overall HP, so that is a little bit of a factor in determining the overall damage of the wound pops as well. How much HP do they have? But it's not a significant factor because this monster is near death, and we pop 3 wounds, and we're going to get the scaling of 509, 849, and 1358. So there's no reason not to do this. Just because their health is a little lower, that shouldn't ever dissuade you not to attempt to burst multiple wound pops. And this is just to show you he is nearly dead. After this giant influx of damage, he keels over and begs for mercy. Well, he can't even beg. He just stopped breathing, and that's what we do. Now, I do want to, again, refer to Pike over at Pike Analysis. There's some very technical math so you can determine exactly what is going on in the scaling for the HP and the wound pops. I just am not able to accurately and easily describe that information, so make sure you check them out. This is the clip that I've been teasing with, and yeah, I think everybody's starting to notice that, okay, we see the wound pop damage, but what's all this
other damage that's happening in these situations. There's like 5 or 6 pops of 200 going off, other than the massively scaled hits of the wound pops. We're starting to understand that, but before we can get into that conversation, that's kind of more specifically towards the longsword. But I want to take a few minutes to discuss everything we've discussed so far, because that is important to every hunter, every weapon, and I want to explain why. There is literally an overwhelming ways you can use the information that we're talking about to actually form strategies. So I'll try to touch upon just a few that I can actually think of. But I want to take a minute to say that every video I ever come out with, it's always geared towards providing information, whether it's techniques or items or builds or damage, that you can go home and actually use that information the next time you turn on your PlayStation or your PC and actually boot up the game and play. That being said, I don't like to make certain types of videos. Like, I don't want to make a video on like this cheating scandal. I just really don't see the point in it, because at the end of the day, I mean, what am I going to make this video on? Water is wet, the sky is up, the earth is round, modders are cheating on a PC game. I mean, really, is there something everyone expected this from the get-go, you know? So those are type of videos I'm just never going to make, because I want to be able to provide you something that you can actually include in your actual gameplay, you know? That being said, this conversation about Monster Hunter maybe being too easy, stuff like that, I do want to have a little bit of a conversation of that a little bit towards the end of the video, because I think some of this information is going to be relevant to that. But that's probably going to be the gist of any kind of video I ever make that's more opinion based, because I think I got some thoughts on that I'm just not hearing in other voices, and I'd like for that to be expressed, basically. Anyways, let's get back to the ways we can use this strategically. And the first person I'm thinking of is actually Felix, because I remember talking to him about some of this information, and he asked me how will that apply for me as a sword and shield main. He's an amazing sword and shield speedrunner. Him, Kaito 123 have been really working together to develop some techniques based on focus strikes as well. So I wanted to gear this beginning portion of more towards weapons that don't have the ability to do multiple focus strikes, because look, if you see right here, me, Raven, and Zoe, all three of us land our focus strikes. But Zoe landed his first. I did not get a wound pop damage. That 80 you see is not a wound pop damage. That's actually another, what we're calling a double pop, which is the next segment that we're going to talk about. It doesn't have the weakness exploit type notations. So because Zoe hit the wound first, he got the wound pop damage. But the rest of us get the rest of our damage in those physical strikes, just not the wound pop damage. So during this fight, we were actually communicating, and Felix let me get the wound first, and then he immediately followed up with his focus strike. So he's just not going to get the perks of the wound pop, but he's going to get all the other damage and perks that come along with that, with whatever weapon, you know? So that's really interesting for the sword and shield, because Kaito 123, Felix have been talking about this, about being able to coordinate multiple wound strikes on the same wound, and then doing something like this, because you have your ability to launch yourself up in the air, and you could come down with shield bashes. All three of you, all four of you, really inflict a huge amount of stun. I think they're even talking about only 2 people doing it, because it's too much stun, you know? I wouldn't do what's going on here. I wouldn't aim for the secondary wound, because I was trying to see if a sword and shield could get the 30-50 scaling, and you'll see a 50 pop, but that's the white flake torrent. That's not the wound pop. No weakness exploit notifications. So you can use your focus strikes to increase damage. The hunting horn can actually hit 2 wounds as well, you know, and get 2 pops. And we were talking about before, a red and a blue pop, that's all you need to start getting triple digit values. So start playing around with your weapons when it comes to focus strikes and what they can actually do, and you'd be really interesting on how, you know, this is a clip of the hunting horn. It actually gets the wound on the other side, because I was so close to this wound. I don't know if that was a glitch, but it makes me think that it's going to be able to get multiple wounds from different sides of a monster as well. And here Biggie goes ahead and does her focus strike after I initiate mine, and is able to pump all that damage in and get her notes, and whatever affects your weapon that you're looking to have, you can still get it. Just focus your attack to happen after a focus strike from somebody like a long sword or great sword, or in my group I tell people I'm going to be built for Partbreaker 3. You know, you can still have everything you want to have happen from wounds still happen. Just be a little patient with it and see what happens, you know. Amazing things start to happen uh, it's funny because this is just a test. Zoe and I were just talking about, hey, I was thinking at this time that teammates' damage is what's pumping up my wound damage. I didn't know the scaling. So we were doing some tests where he lands his Helmbreaker and then I do my Focus Strike. There's one wound open currently. And what's happening in this situation is he comes down and does his Helmbreaker, and my Focus Strike plus his Helmbreaker do enough wound to open up a second wound right here. And then his Spirit release and my Seeker Swipe is what we're calling this swipe, actually ends up opening up a third wound on his left or back left leg. You're going to see that happen right here. I end up getting 3 wound pops. And this isn't with Partbreaker. This is just my normal Bone Sword from the beginning of the video. This is no special perks. And look at that kind of damage that we just got from coordinating our attacks a little bit. This is truly amazing. So let's go back to this bow clip from earlier. So because it hits all the wounds at 100% of the value, 50, 50, 50, it's generally your best one to hit a single wound to get the 100% damage value, but I really wouldn't recommend that, especially if it's a red wound. You probably want to open up a few more wounds because of the reasonings we're talking about through the entire video. But for example, if you want to pop one single red wound or blue wound to get a single knockdown, or there's a red wound on a leg, yeah, you should be the one that targets that to get the most damage of it, and plus you have the range to be able to hit that from any angle and not have to worry about getting hit. So that's maybe is going to be the specialty for the bow, is singular wound strikes. Once you get past 2, it's always less damage than having somebody like a gun lance or a great sword or the long sword do that kind of stuff. And I'm not saying that you have to be so hyper focused on this stuff throughout the entire fight. These situations just kind of naturally present themselves. I'll show that a little bit later in the video, where we're not necessarily trying to make some of these things happen, but they just kind of do based on the fights and the mechanics and opening up wounds and so forth. So it's not something you have to be super mindful of, but the thing you do want to be mindful of is maybe coordinating a little bit, maybe making sure you're the second person to hit a wound rather than a first one. Maybe you emphasize getting 1 or 2 wounds, but you don't emphasize getting all 3. These kind of things can be really helpful when you're working with a team, and we're often communicating with our voice chats. So yeah, play around with this stuff. The amount of possibilities with all the weapons of what you can do and accomplish is literally infinity. All right, let's talk some strats for every long sworder, great sworder, gun lancer, everybody else that can hit multiple wounds like this. First of all, have Partbreaker 3. It even increases the wound pops of your mount finishers. It has some modifiers to add for the wound breaks on Helmbreaker, Spirit Release. It's a must-have damage-inducing skill for this type of strategy and this type of gameplay that we're going to talk about. I really don't even know how to quantify this, so I'm just going to show clips and let you know what I was thinking in the process, because the information that we talked about has been dictating my gameplay. Here we had 5 wounds on the monster, and with a little bit of communication, I asked the guys to back off and let me go ahead and get the initial strike, and then you guys can pump whatever damage you want, focus strikes or whatever else you want to do after that. Just let me hit it first. So with that, I was able to burst all 5, and now we can have that discussion about how these things scale beyond 3 wounds. After that, it goes to the tune of 165.7% and then 171.4%. Basically, the scaling starts tapering off, because if you start scaling too much higher than that, you're going to get ridiculous amount of damages and insta kills. So this is a way to somewhat cap that, but still, this total focus strike does 5,021 damage. It's absolutely insane, and I do not have Partbreaker 3 on this build. This is just my meta build and the scaling for insane damage. It's so important. Here, I'm doing a mount, and now I'm always starting to leave my head wound open so I can have that as a wound ready to go. And I was planning on doing my Helmbreaker, and then I noticed the blue wound developed. I cancel it out because now I want this damage instead. And then I'm going to get my meter back on a knockdown, and now I have red charge
to do whatever I want, whatever types, R2 triangles, another helmet, whatever you want to do afterwards. You know, I was set up for it because I was aware, especially those blue wounds. And that's another thing I've been asking my squad is when you see blue wounds, kind of let me handle it. I am building my builds for Partbreaker 3. We're going to talk about the builds after this as well. And because of that, they backed off here in this situation. Not during the rest of the fight, just when the blue wounds were available. Boom. 912 pop, not to mention all the other pops, probably about 1800-ish, 2000 damage maybe. Seconds later, there's still one there. Paralysis. All I'm concerned about is opening up more wounds, and bam, within seconds, another 912, the same damage, maybe even a little bit more. Huge explosions of damage with a little bit of strategizing. You know, similar situation right here. I don't even go for singular wounds. I let everybody else happen, everybody else take them, and then when I see those multiples, that's when I get aggressive about it, you know? Here, I noticed a blue wound develop on his head, so I immediately launched my Helmbreaker to try to aim it at some other part of the body. Spirit Release, got my red wound. Now I go ahead and do my 2 wounds. Boom, knockdown, red gauge, let's party all over again here. This is another situation with the entire squad. This is just 2 wounds right here, gets the knockdown, and now there's a wound open. I'm not even thinking about getting it. I'm just trying to open up more wounds. A paralysis happens. Paralysis, mounts, traps. All I'm thinking is let's open up wounds, and then I see the blue one, take it, and boom, this explosion of damage. Wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So it's definitely causing me to change up my gameplay a little bit, to strategize a little bit, to create these damage explosions, because it's not just the damage. Here I see several wounds, but they're not kind of in a row. So I'm like, okay, I have another focus strike that goes backwards that clears out a bunch of wounds. Bam, get 3 of them, instant death. 900, 300, 200s, you know, just insane amounts of damage from stacking the mechanics that we're talking about. I noticed he had a red wound here, the Arkveld, so I was like, okay, let me cancel my Helmbreaker, let's do some R2s, and then I'm going to do another Helmbreaker to open up as many wounds as I can. Somebody took the other wound, and then this beautiful cinematic thing happened. I got my red wound, but lo and behold, a blue wound popped up. And now I have the opportunity to do my focus strike. Bam, bam, 800, 400, you know. This is my thought process. I'm intentionally being patient with wound creation to get these situations to develop and for huge results as far as damage goes, but not just damage, knockdowns. Caused another knockdown because we did a chain break because of the previous blue wound knockdown into subsequent follow-ups, into paralysis, into whatever, and more wounds just developed because of all this. Another knockdown from the stun. The monster is completely incapacitated from all the things that we're doing, including the new strategy. This was just the hell of it. 2 Balaharas, each had a wound. I was like, boom, and I got both of them, knocked them both flat on their asses. It was just fun. This is fun, guys. This aspect, this mechanic is reaching out to that 10-year-old in me and that just wants to go wee when he plays video games. And that's exactly what's happening. You know, we all got tired of the longsword R2 triangle dominance. Here I just took a wild stab on a flyby, got 2 wounds, 1 popped for 1,000, instantly floored him. Look, just wild. I knew he had 2 open wounds, and I thought I could get one of them, and I did. And this beautiful cinematic thing happened. Pop, 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 pop on the ground, and here comes the damage afterwards. It's hard for me to quantify, there's not a limit I can put to, like, here are the strategies that you can now do with this, because it's kind of endless. Another blue wound open popped up. I was a little premature on that one. I should have given it a little bit more time, but another knockdown, and these fights aren't lasting very long. You do give up a little bit of damage because of the builds when you want to put Partbreaker 3, and we'll talk about that next, and then we'll go into our longsword specific mechanics. But yeah, there's just so many things that we can do with this information, and I'm looking forward to it. So I definitely wanted to come up with a couple of different builds to be able to, use the strategies that we're trying to implement here. And I think overall, I like this one the very best. We're going to want weakness exploit max because we're going to want max crit hits that we can get on wounds. Not so much for the
wound explosion, because we discussed before, affinity, crit boost, things like that don't affect the wound pop damage, but they do affect the other damage that we're looking at in focus strikes and subsequent pop damages and swipe damages. So this is going to be pretty important to get high damage, because the first thing I want to let you know is, compared to, let's say, the other meta type builds that you're running right now, this is going to be overall less damage when it comes to individual swipes and so forth, but it will be comparable, don't get me wrong. So I don't want to act like this is super meta as of right now, but it has potential. We'll discuss that after these builds. So anyways, this is something that you use primarily, you know, you got your agitator max, you got your max might max, you got your antivirus, all that good stuff, you know. So with this Partbreaker 3 build, I'm trying to get my max might and my weakness exploit maxed out as much as possible. If you notice, I only have antivirus 1. So the way this works is, with weakness exploit, we get a total of 50% affinity on wounds. You got your 5 in your weapon, of course. Max Might gives me another 30, that's 85. And then with antivirus, you get 15 from just the 2-piece set without antivirus 1, 2, or 3. You have 15 that's right there once you cure your frenzy for the first time. So that's 100% affinity once that antivirus is kicked in, and this is before agitator, people. And then the antivirus gives me an additional 3%, and the agitator is also going to give me, when agitated, an additional 3%. So a little bit more crit hits, 6% more in other situations of the fight too. But if you notice, I don't have burst, I don't have adrenaline rush. Burst especially is something that I really like to squeeze into this build. I just can't, because the agitator comes from the helmet. This is how we're going to build it. We're going to use the Zoshia helmet beta. We're going to use the Arkveld chest beta. We're going to use the Guardian full gore Vem braces. Let's just show the skills that come along with the stuff. That's where the agitator comes from. Weakness exploit. You know, this is your standard stuff that you've been using in other builds. Just a slightly new combination, so we can get all the skills that we're looking for. Your Counter Strike 3 charm, your typical gore stuff for your 2-piece gores. You're generally going to run the waist and the legs, and we're going to deck it out like this. Tenderizer, Destroyer, Sheath, Tenderizer, Mighty, Destroyer, sorry, I can't speak today, Tenderizer, Mighty, Tenderizer, Sheath, and that's where we get all the skills that we're looking for. Alternatively, this is my other Partbreaker 3 build. The first thing you're going to notice is there's no gore pieces, so you're not going to have that affinity from the Frenzy or the Antivirus, but you will have the 2-piece. We're going to use 3 pieces of Zoshia, the helmet, the chest, and the greaves. We're going to use the Ajarkon coil beta and the Guardian Rathalos Vem braces, and so you will have the super recovery that goes along with this. With weakness exploit, we have 50% affinity on the wounds. Maximum might, we got an additional 30%. There goes your 80 right there, 5 in your weapon. So basically, the only time we're going to get 100% affinity, especially on the wounds, is during agitation, but that happens a lot in the fight anyways, so this is also a viable option. You're just going to have a little less time uptick of having 100% affinity on wounds, basically when they're not agitated, which doesn't make a huge difference, but it can if you really wanted to, really. Going to have our quick sheath. The Guardian Rathalos Vem braces are going to give us our quick sheath and the space we need for our maximum might, and we're actually going to get 2 levels of our Destroyer from this piece right here, along with another 2 slot. If you're using any other build, this is basically Partbreaker 3 in a piece right here, guys. Partbreaker 2 on the actual waist, and a level 2 slot to slot it in. So if you want to use your Greatsword or Gun Lance or any other build, and you're having a little bit of difficulty slotting that, try this piece and see what you can do with it, And there goes those Vem braces that we talked about. And yeah, that's the pretty much, we've got to have our Quick Sheet 3. These are built for long swords, but if you're the Greatsword or the Gun Lance, feel free to tweak this around, especially those arm pieces. That's really where you're going to get the most mobility of these builds, to eliminate the Quick Sheath and put some more damage-inducing skills. We do have burst in this build, which I really like. Only Counter Strike 1, still no adrenaline rush. And now the last point I want to make about builds in general. Basically, all this information we're talking about is very interesting, it's very fun, but is this meta? Could this be meta? And the answer is, I think yes, but not yet. For example, this is our normal... Ooh, what am I wearing? Let's go to the Peppo build. Normal meta stuff, right? Right here. And once we get to the point where we're going to have some armor that can slot maybe a little bit more in here, just a little bit, then you're going to start weighing off what is the better damage inducing skills. And I would still keep my Counter Strike 3. I would still keep my Agitator 20. I would still keep my gore, that kind of stuff. But as long as I can have something similar to this, my next most important damage-inducing skill is now going to be Partbreaker 3 for all the reasons that we're talking about. So much to the point that I don't mind. I like Counter-Strike 1. I love having Counter-Strike 1, you know? But if I could have two slots in here, I would drop that in an instant to get max Partbreaker in a build like this instantly, because that would definitely be much more DPS overall for those wound pops and wound damage than you have with Counter-Strike. So these builds that we're creating right now are not far off from being able to house Partbreaker 3 on top of everything else, and when that becomes a situation, I believe that build is going to be the ultra metiest meta thing you can do. Also, there's one more thing to consider too, is all of this damage is based on the HP of the monster. So as the monsters that come out further in the releases, the title updates, if they have more HP, this strategy, these tactics are just going to be even more viable, even more damaging, even more and higher high-popping numbers. Once we get to Master Rank, if they're still keeping this scaling and this implementation, which I believe they will, this is going to be crazy ridiculous for when it comes to that level of HP on monsters, and I don't see how this could not be influencing the meta in whether it's regular casual fights to have more bullyable, easy fights that you can, you know, give people strategy on how to clear monsters and things like that, or actual speed running, you know? This is just too much damage in a short amount of time that's easily set up and communicated with your team to be ignored. It's okay right now because as there was, you know, talk of earlier, the game's a little easy. We're going to get into that conversation toward the very end of this video. But yeah, I believe that the builds are not too far off to be meta with Partbreaker 3, making all the things that we've just talked about for this previous hour. I'm sorry this video is so long. Just even more important as the game and the history of this game progresses. I've played Iceborne for 5,000 hours. I'm not a noob to this game. I will play these games forever, you know, and I will always dissect these games. And knowing what I know about previous Monster Hunters, I got some credit, you know. Me and the squad, we could get Fatalis. The best time I ever had was Greatswords, of course. It was like 540, you know. Long swords, Manji script 606, you know, not flawless speed running, but I could hang with the big boys, you know. So I am thoroughly looking forward to creating meta builds. I'm thoroughly looking forward to share those meta builds with you as they develop, and the next damaging step, as long as everything stays as it is unless some brand new skill develops, Partbreaker 3 is raising in value with these mechanics, and with a little bit of more space in the builds, boom, it's done at Partbreaker 3, and you're going to have amazing damage and amazing fun.
Alright, you longsword mains, this one's just for you for now, but this might work on some other weapons. Check out the Christmas tree lights of damage you're about to see with all these other 200 pops. Let's show this clip a little slower. I want you to focus on a couple of things. We got your initial focus strike, and then what me and Pike are calling the seeker swipe, the animation of left or right or back that allows you to swipe multiple wounds, and it hits on the right wound for 208, the left blue wound for 220, and you see this massive damage of 200-ish explosions that we're calling double pops. And now let's go back to the basics a little bit, explain each step of the process and how we got there. This is your typical focus strike. This is how I have been doing singular focus strikes because I wanted everything to hit the wound for the crit hits, weakness exploit, that's what I want, and got my 123 8-star wound pop, you know. Here we do it again. This is what I thought would be the most damage. It's 701 damage. Everything hits the wound. I get my pop, 701 damage. Now watch this. When I use my seeker swipe and actually hit a target that's not the wound, not the initial wound, I get a follow-up double pop of 160 on top of the wound pop. Why is this happening? It's because, okay, we're going to initiate our strike here. We're going to hit a secondary target,
And as a mechanic for the longsword, if you do that as secondary target, you're going to get a damage pop on the initial wound on top of the initial wound. That is going to be correlated by the motion value of your weapon and the hit zone value that you hit, not necessarily the damage I just got there. I'll come back to that. So here's my singular focus strike, 701 damage, everything hit, no double pop. Here's the one with the seeker swipe with the double pop, 824, significantly more damage. And yes, this works on multiple wounds. Here we go. I'm going to strike this first wound. I want my first seeker swipe to hit the original wound, and the second one's going to hit a new wound and actually get crit hit. This is why we want weakness exploit, because we're doing these things with wounds. And because even though it's a crit hit, it's not the actual hit value that you get here that determines it. It's the 160 I'm getting because of the motion value of the weapon and the hit zone value that you're aiming for. And yes, on 3 wounds, the same situation, and you're getting a 160 pop on every single wound that blows up. This is amazing. This is incredibly an incredible additional amount to your damage that you're performing when you're doing multiple focus strikes. Of course it works with all 3, and there's so much more to this too. You have a huge hitbox for this weapon. It's just going to be very, very, very easy to do. Here I want to show you that we got Partbreaker 3 on, and it also, increases your wound pop damage, but it slightly increases the double pop damage as well. It jumped up from 160 to 164.7. Again, it's not based on the overall damage. There's certain modifiers that Pike is going to be able to explain way better than I can. This is why we're working in tandem. I'm really good at showing this in action. He's quite excellent at explaining all the math behind this. And there seems to be some peculiar things too. Here we have a situation where I get all 3 wounds, but everything hits 1 wound, but somehow I still get 1 double pop on 1 wound. I wasn't expecting that. I hit my target as, my initial focus strike like we discussed before. I was expecting no double pops, and it's kind of funny because what seems to happen when it doesn't go the way I wasn't quite expecting, it still seems to go in your favor. I hit the wound only, and I still get that 164 double pop back there. A couple of more unexpected but beneficial things happened. Here I was just going for a focus strike through an area that didn't have a wound, ended up creating a wound and then getting a double pop on both wounds that I destroyed. Here I was doing a singular focus strike like we started this segment off with, and I ended up getting a double pop. So a lot of things are quite not working the way I was thinking that they should, but it's still in your favor, except for this. I hit a spot that was 2 white numbers and I got no pop, so darn. And then here we have a seeker swipe that hits a white value, but it does not affect the 160 damage scaling for the extra double pop I get, 164 with Partbreaker, even though it was a white value on this instance, because it's not the damage that you do in those instances where it hits. It's the motion value of your weapon, your swing, your attack, sorry, and the hit zone value that you aim for. So this is going to be really important to always aim your seeker swipe at the highest available hit zone value, generally the head. But if you can't get to the head, a tail, or the next highest hit zone value that you can to optimize the damage on this. The range, the hitbox of this swing is immense. It's well beyond the actual animation of what you see, even the animation of the slashes. I've seen this hit in ridiculous spaces and ridiculous distances. So bottom line is, always do your motional seeker swipe, left or right or backwards. There's never a point to do the neutral one. It's only going to be harmful for you. And if you do the seeker swipe, it's only going to be beneficial. And some of the times it's not supposed to work, it still will. Now that we understand the mechanics of focus strikes and blue wounds and double pops and seeker swipes, let's slow this down and find out exactly what happened in this clip. Here we have the focus strike initiated on the right side of the screen on the right leg. The seeker swipe is going to first hit the right leg again with this 208 damage, and then the blue wound for 220. It is higher because it's 30% higher. It does modify that, and then the 4 wound explosions of 429, 920, 929, 1140, 1188 all go off, and they all have 208 or 220 on the 929 because that's the blue wound, and that got the higher damage. The 929 is actually scaled a bit higher as well. It should probably have been more like 800-ish. And now we're just going to show one more clip, and then we'll wrap up this video. I just wanted to show right here, this is the big 1933 chonky damage clip that we get. And what happens here is pretty interesting too, because we're going to initiate the focus strike. I'm going to aim towards the head like we were talking about, a high hit zone value. I do the wrong focus strike, so I didn't get the head. I get this one swipe for 62.2, and then I whiff the other one. But on all my damage pops, I get 138.8 as my double pops happening on those. The 62.2 means nothing. That's just how much damage I actually got on the swing. It's the motion value and the hit zone value of the part that I'm hitting that determines this. And once it does, every single wound you burst in that moment will get the double pop. And this is why this tech is phenomenal. First, I have to give a sincere thank you to Pike of Pike Analysis. Without his help and his knowledge, this video just would not have been possible. He has another amazing video on the same subject. Please check out the link in the description and in the comments below. Thank you so much for your help, Pike.
Hey everybody, I know that you're getting dumped on right now by content creators and clickbait titles, so much so you just want to poltergeist in the air and grab your ears and scream no repeatedly, but I do want to have a little bit of a conversation about the ease of Monster Hunter, mainly because a lot of videos I put out about builds and things like that, people are like, well, this game's too easy, none of this really matters. First of all, to us experienced hunters that know things like wake-ups and look for environmental hazards, yeah, this game is tremendously easy. This game is easier than World with Defender armor, for sure. For sure. You know, for us experienced hunters, when we go into a fight, we're looking to square up the monster. You know, even if we don't know the attacks, we're looking to kind of learn them, use our movesets, our iframes, our hyper armor, our counter attacks to dominate fights, and we'll get there sooner than later because we know what to do, how to build, how to eat, how to set up our items, all that stuff. So this game, yeah, it's going to be tremendously easy for us, but be patient. Be patient. You know, it's coming. The roadblocks, the Alatreon type white Fatalis, maybe a diva. The roadblocks that are going to really, really challenge the newer players and give us exactly what we're craving in this game are coming. This game was released early. It's easy to tell. And I don't mind that either because I got to play this game earlier than I probably should have. You know, Capcom, make your money. Just give me my game. And now with all these, you know, Zoshia, Tempered Mitsusune are just a taste of the difficulties that are to come. It's all coming. You got a year or two of content to be released before the DLC, and then the DLC, when you get to Master Rank, guys, Master Rank is a whole new ball game. You know, think Shadow of the Erdtree to regular base Elden Ring, and multiply that more because it's more. It definitely is. And there's going to be new mechanics, maybe a new weapon, hopefully combo sacred attacks because I definitely want to see that in the DLC. But anyways, yeah, those things are coming. And is this easy? Yes. Should it be easier? I don't know, but I'm glad it is. You know, Big Iron made this comment about her friend that never played Monster Hunter before, but is absolutely into it now because of this game. And if that transcends into them carrying on into the finer aspects of this game, wonderful. This game is amazing. It satisfies so many different gaming itches. It's one of the deepest games and franchises you'll ever find. And the multiplayer aspect of this game is truly transcendent. It is a different experience when you're able to coordinate your hunts and be able to talk to each other about builds and techniques and you know, all that kind of stuff. And I want to invite you to our squad, Zero Faints. Don't worry, it's just a moniker. We don't expect perfection, you know. We're not Team Darkside. There's no tryouts for us. We are 400 global hunters from literally all over the corners of this globe that love this game and other games. We're building other communities as well with a mutual respect for each other because we're here to game. If that sounds interesting, check out our description and join our squad. Other than that, be good to each other and see ya.